I'm Jacqueline Isaacs, also known as the Unsmug Mum, and jacquelineisaacs.co.uk. And in my previous video, we began to explore what some of the quite recent diets, weight loss programs try and focus on, such as paleo and plant-based and so forth. And we discussed the similarities between how they cite going back to prehistoric, our old bodies that haven't apparently changed very much, whilst our food and environment has evolved, we apparently haven't. And so they are now looking back to prehistoric man and how the hunter-gatherer ate, and talking about high plant and hunting and the lean muscly meat. And so we started to grasp the concept of how actually they're fairly similar, and we talked about the similarities, and it all came back to food as it, let me just get my high-tech prop ready, as it appears in nature. It's basically the gist of both of them, whether it's meat or plant, it's as it appears in nature. And obviously, you know from all my previous videos, I'm a big fan of old Mother Nature and how she tried her best to help us, and like, our bodies have evolved along with what Mother Nature provided. And so all of the sugars were packaged with fibre, and the fats, if they're fats in a plant, that has fibre. If it's fats in an animal, it had muscly lean protein meat to chew. And obviously, you know my little quip of, if it doesn't make you chew, it ain't going to reach your poo, because obviously what we want is the hairagey porridgey plug hole effect. We want sticks down the stream. We want some of that food to reach the end of our 22-foot long intestines to stimulate our appetite reducing hormone peptide YY, and we want our good guys, our friendly gut bacteria, because there's been a lot about prebiotics, probiotics and all of that in the media as well, and we're becoming more aware of the good guys that live in our gut. And ultimately, rather than spending absolute fortunes on prebiotics, probiotics, whether we're not sure whether they work or not, and which, by the way, always buy probiotics that are stored in a fridge, never on a shop shelf, because they're alive. They're little dudes that are alive. So let's think about it. You know, preserved in a fridge, there's more chance that more of them are going to be alive when they reach our gut. And ultimately, to help our good guy numbers increase, we need to feed them, otherwise they're going to die off. It's just logical. And obviously they eat the fibre and in our diets that we don't digest, and actually reaches them in the poo factory. So I wanted to start off, before going really into the nitty gritty of what happens to tabletop sugar and that sucrose glucose bond when it hits our liver and gets digested in our bodies. There's a lot of these concepts we need to have in our heads, especially the one about as it appears in nature, because a lot of our problems, and this doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, you can never eat that thing again. I had like fish and chips at the last weekend, you know, I still eat my processed and convenient and takeaway foods, but it's about awareness. And obviously, if you want something to change, if you want your weight to change, then it's logical that changes do have to be made, but it's making the right changes. So as it appears in nature, we are starting to explore the concept that hunter and gatherer both have in common: paleo, vegan, high plant, as it appears in nature. They have in common that they tend to avoid processed meat and concentrated carbs. In other words, man-made food products, things that are being messed about with by man. The reason being that processed meats, if you take some of maybe our sandwich meats, our burgers, our sausages and so forth, they are similar to our processed carbs. You remember I used the example of envisaging a full square metre of wheat crop condensed down, refined and squeezed into this neat little regular loaf of bread, 800-gram loaf of bread. And, you know, the ability that our machines and our processing has reduced and concentrated down, like squeezing juice from a fruit, concentrated those carbs. A similar thing has happened with our meats. So, you know, you've got like, especially in some of the cheaper, the processed meats, you'll have the less appealing looking cuts and leftover bits and pieces all mushed up, and so really you've got the same effects. You have concentrated fat energy, so one's concentrated fat energy, one's concentrated carb energy, both different types of energy. And in combination with that, especially if they're trying to advertise themselves as a low fat processed food, thinking about processed meats, the other thing to be aware of is that a lot of these processed meats are mixed with concentrated carbs. So, you know, you think of your average takeaway burger, for instance, or hot dog or whatever. You have the concentrated fat energy in the processed meat. You have in that meat mixed concentrated carbs, because they're likely to have some sort of flour mixer, whether that be a gluten-y flour or a gluten-free flour, doesn't matter. It's concentrated carb energy mixed into your meat, and then we wrap that around in a bun of even more concentrated carb energy. And so this, again, this isn't to say that we can't necessarily ever eat a burger again, because I fully intend to when barbecue season comes back round, but it's about understanding and this awareness and knowing that, well, if I'm going to have something like that, I'm going to help myself with my hairy porridgey plug holes and my sticks down the stream, and I'm going to eat that with some sort of veg. So, you know, this is, again, bigging up the importance of fibre, which has obviously helped me, so hopefully it'll help you. Now, keeping all that in our head, one of the other things that some of these different weight loss programs and diets, whether it be paleo or plant-based, so forth, and there's a lot of advocates for clean eating, or, you know, avoiding processed products or beige products or whatever they want to call it. Another commonality, apart from the awareness that these products are high energy and easy to digest, remember that thing that it's a very simple way of knowing if something's going to be easy to digest by just paying attention to how hard it makes you chew. Something that makes you chew a lot before you can swallow it is going to be harder to digest. It's as simple as that. So another thing that these things have in common, and also, you know, going back to sort of prehistoric hunter-gatherer times, is the fact that in addition to both avoiding processed meats and concentrated carbs, they also have in common that they are avoiding products containing artificial ingredients. And that's really important. Now, in a way, I've been absurdly lucky, I think, that I've got in a very solid habit now, because I have allergies and intolerances. I have to religiously check ingredients lists, and that, I think, is one of the most important habits when you're trying to become aware of your foods that you're eating. If you want something to change about your body, is just pay attention and look closer at what it is that you're eating, especially if you've tried to lose some weight and maybe lost a bit and then plateaued, or you're struggling, or it's really important to actually look at what we're putting in our mouths. And that is not about restricting or depriving. It's looking at ingredients lists, because this video is about Soluble Additives. Artificial ingredients. They're really easy to spot. They're the ones with the names that they're kind of in there. You kind of vaguely recognise them because they're in a lot of foods, but you don't really know what they are. And yet we eat them anyway. So one of the things that my allergies has done for me is that I have to religiously check ingredients lists, which means that I was able to spot patterns. I was able to pin down what triggered migraines, for instance. Products, added artificial ingredients like maltodextrin, for instance, triggers a migraine for me. Weird, sort of played about with monodisaccharides or fatty acids and all of these weird and wonderful names that are out there. These artificial ingredients. So this is another thing that this drive towards paleo eating, people have this concept of that it's all about eating meat and no carbs. Well, no, it's not actually. It's actually really high plant. It's about good quality lean meats, but more important than that, it's about avoiding artificial additives. And that's not even, when you go truly paleo, it's not even about avoiding processed meat. It's about the meats you eat having not having artificial ingredients and additives added into that specific product, but that the animals that meat came from weren't fed hormones and antibiotics and artificial ingredients in their feed, or, you know, so right from the offset, that animal was artificial ingredient free. Because let's remember, it's not just our processed, man-made food products that are out there that are very easy to spot because they just don't look anything like as they appear in nature. That's your clue. That's your really easy clue that something's been messed about with and likely to have some sort of processing, refining, concentrated energies and probably artificial ingredients to preserve it and keep it on the shelf for longer. So one of the things that the hunter-gatherer and paleo and plant-based diets are high in is foodstuffs that are more like as they are found in nature without those artificial ingredients added, either via the processing part, so those burgers, those sausages, those breads, whatever. I mean, I found it very interesting. I previously uploaded a link where we explored how much of a wheat field did it take to make a loaf of bread, and that was where we found out that a whole square metre of crops, what you're eating a whole square metre of crops in one organic loaf of bread. But I found it really interesting that they had to specifically use the example of an organic loaf of bread to be sure that all of the ingredients were literally just the wheat, the wheat flour and the sugar or whatever else and the yeast, and that was in there. Because in regular loaves of breads that are not organic, they would need to then account for the weight of the additives. And, you know, isn't that just eye-opening in itself? That our additives are heavy, that they are heavy enough that in order to get an accurate answer for that, how much wheat in a loaf of bread, they had to be sure to specifically and specify that it was an organic loaf of bread, because the additives in normal loaves of bread weigh so heavy it would have distorted the answer. So why have I called them ASBO additives? Okay, so we can appreciate that maybe some of these more clean eating advocates, whether it be paleo, whether it be high plant or all plant, which all tend to concentrate on foods as they appear in nature, and therefore are also, the other commonality between them is that they are reducing their ASBO additives, their artificial ingredients. Why is that important? And it is important, and especially if you are struggling and do not understand and think that you eat fairly healthy, and or your weight has plateaued and you can't quite figure out why. And this could be the answer, and it could indeed help you. Every diet or weight loss program out there tends to concentrate on two aspects. They reduce the energy intake, whether it be from fat or glucose, carb energy, or both. So they tend to reduce a really easy way to reduce your fat energy intake and your concentrated carb intake is to reduce products that contain man-made processed foods, processed meats and processed carbs like flour-based products. Because obviously, as we discussed, that is concentrated fat energy, concentrated carb energy. So a really easy way to reduce that energy intake. But is it all about reducing intake? Well, obviously, one of the things that I've done, and it's kind of half been deliberate, half not, in that I lost all my weight, and I've got to be careful about advocating this, with no exercise. Okay? There's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I kind of wanted to make the point that weight loss is about our looking at our foods more than our exercise. Exercise, absolutely key and brilliant for extending your lifespan, your body, your health, your organ health. It has been linked to gut health even. There are loads of good reasons to exercise, okay? But there's part of me wanted to isolate what I was doing with my food to really strengthen that, hey guys, this works, yeah? So exercise as well, yeah, great if you can do both. Me personally, and another thing to be aware of if you have struggled or are struggling, I am somebody that I don't want to put myself in a negative frame of mind where I feel like every day is hard. And to make things easier, because it is hard to lose weight, and I've been 15 stone twice before, once after pregnancy, during pregnancy, and once absolutely when I was like a teenager, when I was at college. And I know how hard it is to lose all that weight, and especially when you're that much bigger, it takes an awful long time for it to actually notice that you're losing weight. You might notice it in clothes slightly loosening and whatever, but you can lose literal stones and people won't even notice because you're that much bigger, and it takes that much more before people really notice. So I know how hard that is. And so if that is something that you're struggling with, I am a big advocate of doing one thing at a time. One thing. Address your food or your exercise. Or, you know, if you're giving up smoking, don't try and do everything at once. You're not a machine. You're human with feelings and you need to live. This is all life. Every day is life and you need to enjoy life. One thing at a time. So, you know, don't try and lose weight, start a new exercise regime and give up smoking and give up drinking all at the same time. Choose a thing. Choose the thing that's most important to you and concentrate on that one thing. So that is another reason as to why I focused on what I was putting in my mouth, because I was not being particularly healthy and I got myself in a bit of a rut and I needed to lift myself out of that. So why Soluble Additives? Now, again, I've mentioned that if we maybe have hit a plateau or we're puzzled, we're looking at our food and we're thinking, well, actually, I don't really eat that bad. What is it? Well, obviously, that we could look at our processed food, but we could look at our ingredients lists, actually look at what it is that we're eating. And obviously, anyone that has an allergy or is aware of allergies will be maybe more able to do this more easily, because it is just literally a new habit that you have to form. Just turn the packet around, look at the ingredients list, and it's usually a clue. If there's a great big long list, that's a clue that there's lots of stuff in there that you don't really know what it is. So why have I called them Soluble Additives? And this is an important concept. And what has all of this got to do with sugar? This is an important concept to grasp because of what we understand what happens to sugar in possibly the next video. The body does not process or use artificial additives. Yeah, so we're geared up to use food as it appears in nature. Our bodies are geared up to use the glucose, the carb energy. Our bodies are geared up to use the fat energy. Our bodies are geared up to use the protein and to need the fibre. Our bodies have been designed in sync with the food in our environment. Yeah, so this is where a lot of these going back to nature style diet and weight loss programs are really paying attention to ultimately. In terms of Soluble Additives, artificial ingredients, anything on that ingredients list that you don't really know what it is, our body will not process or use that. It's not designed to. That's a very, very, very modern invention, these additives. And I think we somehow assume that these artificial additives, because they've been safety tested, when we put them in our mouth, we sort of somehow assume that they magically disappear or magically come out down the toilet pan. No. What happens? Why have I called them Soluble Additives? And I think this concept will lead on nicely to understanding what happens with fructose in the glucose-fructose combination in our tabletop sugar in the next video. Because what our body does, it goes, hey, I don't know what that is. And it could be acting up a bit antisocial behaviour, yeah? What do we do with people that break the law, seriously break the law? What do we do with them? We stick them in a prison cell. What does our body do with something that looks like it's acting up or it's causing trouble? What is that? What is it going to do? Sticks it in a prison cell. What are the body's prison cells? Think of a little white padded cell, a fat cell. So where do all of those artificial ingredients and ASBO additives that our body can't use and could potentially create a lot of havoc, what does the body do with them? Do they just benignly pass through? Do they not interact with our body at all? Do they just come out in a poo? No. Our body protects itself. It's a clever thing, our body. It protects itself. And if we've got something that's very shouty, ASBO-ish, doesn't fit, it's breaking the law, it's going to stick it in a prison cell. It's going to stick it in a white padded cell. It's going to stick it in a fat cell. It's imprisoned, stored, padded into fat. Because the other thing you've got to remember, how do these additives, a lot of these additives are fat soluble. Yeah, there's a link that I know that I've come across that I will find, and I will share the link. I think it's like one of these dummies, these dummies things that it tells you, explains stuff to you. And that explains what happens to these additives and artificial and chemicals when we put them in, what happens to them. They basically, a lot of these additives are fat soluble. What that means, if they are fat soluble, that means that they can go into that fat cell. They can be absorbed into that fat. Okay. You may be aware of, say, nutrients in vegetables, being many of those nutrients being water soluble and leaching out into the water. That's because those nutrients are water soluble. Interestingly, interesting point to note, if when you are eating your veggies, it is important to eat them with some dietary fat, because many of the precious nutrients in vegetables are in fact not just water soluble but fat soluble, and we can miss out on an awful lot of nutrients if we don't eat our vegetables with some fat. So there's the idea of water soluble and fat soluble. And many of the artificial ingredients and additives in our foods are fat soluble, which means that they can enter into that fat. They can enter into and be protected in that padded white cell, because the body does it looks a bit scary. Body is, is breaking the law. We're going to stick that and protect the body from it by putting it in a fat cell. So if you are struggling to manage or lose weight, or maybe you've plateaued, start getting in a really easy, simple habit of just looking at ingredients lists and starting to appreciate how many maybe artificial ingredients you might be unknowingly consuming. And remember that concept of ASBO additives. Yeah, high-tech proper. ASBO additives, they are antisocial, they are breaking the laws of nature, they are not natural, they are not found in nature. And as they are breaking the law, the body puts them in a white padded cell to protect the body from them. So all of these artificial ingredients and additives are fat, many of them are fat soluble and go into our fat. And that dummies link, if memory serves, that dummies link that I came across a while back, which I will find and share with you, really spells out as well, and I think it lists a few of them, what happens to some of these artificial ingredients when we ingest them. They don't just benignly, some of them don't just benignly just sit in their white padded cell. Some of these prisoners, these artificial ingredient prisoners, some of them really act up whilst they're in that prison cell. Yeah, some of them can change, some of them can turn maybe carcinogenic and cancerous. Okay, so this is where we need to maybe just get in the really simple habit of just looking at our ingredients lists, have an awareness, yes, have an awareness of concentrated fat energies, concentrated glucose carb energies, have an awareness of maybe the accidental excess energy that we're consuming without realising it. Making sure we eat our fibre, but have a look at our additives and our artificial ingredients. Get in the habit of looking at ingredients lists. It could inadvertently, you could end up pinpointing the cause of that bit of brain fog that you generally have hanging around. Maybe it's going to pin down a migraine trigger as it did for me. Start having a look and appreciating that personally, if I'm going to gain a bit of weight, I kind of want to enjoy doing it, either maybe from knowingly and consciously having a takeaway, for instance, or having a pudding, for instance. I'd rather knowingly gain a bit of fat that way. I don't really want to gain fat from artificial chemicals and additives that are in my food that are just going to go straight into an ASBO white padded prison cell of fat. So I hope that is helpful, and we've got to kind of try and remember that concept when in the next video we delve into the tabletop sugar and what happens with fructose, and remember what happens to our ASBO additives and how our body protects itself by storing them into fat. Have a good day, guys.